Hey everyone, Chris here from IELTS Advantage with another mini course. So what we're going to focus on this week is IELTS listening. Many of you emailed me and said that you need a band 8 in listening. A lot of you want to go to Canada and that requires 8777 with the 8 being in listening. So we're going to specifically focus on that this week. We're going to give you 3 lessons. Before thinking about why people are not getting an 8 or above for the listening test, we need to think about what does the test get you to do? How is the test built? How is the test put together? What are the things that they are actually testing? Well, number one, what they're doing is they're getting you to listen actively. So what do I mean by that? Well, they're getting you to do something while you are listening. So instead of just listening passively and not really doing anything, they're getting you to complete tasks and answer questions and decide what the correct answer is or filling in the correct answer as you are doing things. And that's very, very important. Number two, you're answering questions while you are listening. So you're multitasking. So you're listening, you're reading the question, you're thinking about the question. You might be thinking about the correct spelling. There's multiple things happening at the same time, which is very, very significant. Number three, you're only listening once. So unlike when you're listening in, your English class, or maybe you're listening to something and you can repeat it many, many times, you can only listen once. Number four, focus for a long, long period of time. The number of students who have never listened to in English for, really listened, actively listened for more than 30 minutes, and the IELTS test is their first time ever doing that, is shocking. And number five, you're listening to authentic English, real English, and we'll talk about the difference between inauthentic materials and authentic materials. And number six, you're listening with no help whatsoever. So it's not like watching a movie where there's maybe subtitles, or even watching like a TED Talk or, a presentation where there's a PowerPoint and there's images to really help you do that. So these are the things that they are doing, or those are the things that you need to do on test day. And are you actually doing those things before test day? So let's have a look at this. It's very, very important. How do you listen? When you're listening to English, what are you doing? So are you listening actively? Are you actually doing something while you are listening? For the vast majority of people, the vast majority of time, you're not listening actively. You're just listening on the bus or watching a movie and not really thinking about it, just listening, not doing anything while you are listening. Are you answering questions while you're listening? Again, if you're listening to English, most of the time, 90% of the time, you're not answering questions. You're not multitasking. So on test day, when you have to not only listen, but read and think about the question and the correct answer, then you're going to be in trouble. Most of the time, you're not only listening once, especially when you're in a general English class. And there's nothing wrong with this, but most of the time, when you're doing a listening task in a general English class, the teacher will play it maybe 2, 3, 4 times. In the IELTS test, you can only listen once. Number four, you have to focus for a long period of time. So there's a big difference between listening for a long period of time and focusing for a long period of time. You might say, oh, I listened to a podcast last night and it was 2 hours long, but you might have only been 100% focused on that podcast for 15 minutes out of the 2 hours. So for most of the time, you're not doing that. Number five, listening to authentic English. Again, in a general English class, if you're using like a recording from a textbook, this is not how most people sound. This is why when people move to like London or Sydney or Toronto, even though they got a very high mark in their listening test, they've no idea what people are saying. It's not because your listening is bad, but you just might have been listening to inauthentic materials. Even if you're watching, a movie, that is generally not how people speak to each other in real life. So you're not doing this. And number six, listening without any help. Most of the time, students are using subtitles, or if they're watching like a TED Talk or something like that, there's, images and presentations to help them. So the reason why you might be struggling is because the test is set up in one way and you are doing the opposite. All right. So if you're doing the opposite to what they're looking for, of course, you're going to have problems. And why are they getting you to do all of these things? Why do they want you to listen actively and only listen once and listen to authentic English and listen without help? Is it because they're really awful people and they want to be mean to you? No, because when you move to London or Sydney or New York or wherever you're going, you can only listen once to people. They don't care if you're an English learner. You have to listen actively. You are not going to get any help. You're going to be listening to authentic English. So this is representing what it is like to live and work in an English-speaking country. So if you're complaining about this, you're really complaining that, I can't understand real English when I move to the country where I want to be. So all of these problems are very fixable. We can solve all of these problems. We need to just start doing these things. So how can we start doing them? That's what the rest of this lesson is going to be about. So, first of all, we can do something called active practice. So there's a big difference between active practice and passive practice. So many students say to me, I got a band 7 in my listening and I listen to podcasts every day, or I listen to TED Talks every day, or I watch movies all the time. Okay, that's fine, but you're not actually doing anything when you're listening to those podcasts or watching those movies or watching those TED Talks. So instead of doing that, practice with a purpose. And in my opinion, it's better to do like 10 or 15 minutes of active practice than it is to do 2 or 3 hours of practice where you're listening, but you're really just, looking out the window while you're on the bus or listening to a movie or a song or something like that and, looking at your phone at the same time. Do something with a purpose. So this could be, for example, and these are all just examples. There's lots and lots of ways that you can do this. But for example, you could try and focus on vocabulary. When you're listening to something, note down any new words and try and guess what those words mean from the context. And then you're actively focusing on something and improving your language. Or you could focus on grammar. You could set yourself a challenge like, how many tenses are they using and why are they using those tenses? So you're thinking about the context, you're thinking about the timelines. Or you could, set yourself a task of why did they use superlatives instead of comparatives? Or why did they use the first conditional instead of the third conditional? And thinking about those grammatical areas that you might need to work on, and that's going to help you. Or thinking about the opinion of someone, let's say it is a TED Talk that you're listening to or a podcast. What are the differences of opinion, or what does that person think about that topic? Or a really interesting one is pronunciation. So you could listen and think about connected speech and intonation and sentence stress and word stress. So you're actively doing something just like you will on test day. On test day, you're not going to be, thinking about the intonation or sentence stress or things like that, but you are actually doing something and getting into the habit of doing something while you are listening. This definitely will be tested on test day, and this might be tested. So vocabulary is obviously very, very important, but they're all good to do. Next, create your own questions. So you probably are familiar with the different types of question on the listening test. So that might be short answer questions or maps questions or multiple choice questions or something like that. If you have a partner or you're in a classroom, what you can do is get a listening sample, that can be anything, and create your own questions. And this is very, very powerful because in order to create your own questions, you have to really, really actively listen and understand the listening sample. Because if you don't, you won't be able to create those questions. And then you can swap with a partner or swap with other people if you're doing it in a group. And then you can discuss the question. So you can say, oh, that was the correct answer because of this. Or you got the wrong answer there because it was actually doing this. So you're really, really thinking deeply about the listening, and you can do this as a collaborative activity if you're doing it with a partner or in a classroom. You can also listen and summarize, which is a very good activity, and you can do this by yourself or with a partner, but it's easy to do by yourself. Listen to a podcast for 10 to 15 minutes. Podcasts are excellent because they're genuine English, especially when someone is, you have multiple people speaking at the same time and they're just having a normal conversation. There are podcasts which are, just one guy or one girl talking about one topic, and it might not be the most natural way of speaking. But for most podcasts, they're very conversational, and it is a very, very good representation of what you will get when you're moving to a new country. So listen to a podcast, let's say for 10 or 15 minutes, and then try and summarize the main points in 1 to 2 minutes. So this forces you to actively listen for a long period of time, and then you can summarize by speaking. So you could just, talk and record yourself if you're if you're by yourself, or in a classroom. You could even have a competition of who can listen and then summarize the best, and you can judge each other. Or you could write a report, a 200-word report, and work on your writing at the same time. Keeping track, so there's 3 things that we're going to look at. One is before the test, during your preparation. One is before you listen, because you're going to have a little bit of time before the recording starts, and that's really, really important. That will help you keep track. And number 3, while you listen, the things that you should be thinking about, and that's going to really help you keep track. And we're also going to look at the end, why many people struggle with the last few questions. A common question that we get asked is, I just have no idea how to answer the last few questions correctly. And we're going to look at why that is and help you out with that. Okay, so before the test, so there's no point in giving you some tricks or strategies to help you keep track if the things that you need to do before the test aren't there. One of the main reasons why you are struggling to keep track is because you're not doing these things before the test. So you might be like, oh, just give me some little tricks or some little strategies that are going to help me. But they're useful, and we're going to show you some of them. But unless you do these things before the test, you are always going to lose track, and you're never going to be able to perform to the level that you really want. So let's look at a few things that you must do before the test. Number 1, improve your listening skills. Many of you say that I'm lost or I can't keep track, but what you're really saying is your listening skills aren't up to the level that they need to be. If your listening skills are below the level that you need to be at, then you're going to constantly get lost. And look at lesson 1 on how to improve those listening skills, and why it's really, really important that you understand the different types of listening skills that are being tested, because they're very, very different from the ones that you maybe are used to, or the ones that you have been practicing. So check out lesson 1 for improving that area. Second thing is focus. If your brain was a muscle, so if you go to the gym and you're lifting weights and you're not used to lifting weights, then you're going to struggle. It's the same with focusing on listening. Focusing on listening in your own language is quite difficult for a long period of time. Focusing in a completely different language to your mother tongue is very, very difficult. You need to practice listening and focusing on that for a long period of time, and you will slowly build up. So many of you talk about losing focus in the middle of the test or towards the end of the test. That might have nothing to do with your grammar, your vocabulary, your listening skills. It might be just you're not used to completely focusing on English for that length of time, and you just build that up slowly, slowly, slowly. Third thing, we also covered this in lesson 1, which is multitasking. Many of you are used to maybe listening to English, but not listening and reading and writing and thinking all at the same time. So this is quite difficult, but like any skill, if you practice this skill, it becomes much, much, much easier. So as you can see, these are things that you need to be thinking about months and weeks before your test. Listening skills, working on focus, working on multitasking. A tip or a trick is not going to help with these. You're not going to be able to, read top 10 tips on how to improve focus, or top 10 tips on how to do this. This is not really going to help you. It's about putting in the work. Many of you don't want to hear that, but I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that there's an easy way around that. You need to start doing this months before your test. Range of accents. So some of you might be very familiar with 1 or 2 accents, but a strange accent comes up. So you will get a range of different accents from the English-speaking world. So that could be Canada, America, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. So you might be used to, say, the New Zealand accent, and then a Scottish accent comes up, or an Irish accent, or a Canadian accent, and you're just unfamiliar with that. What is the solution to that? Listen to a range of different accents. You're going to need to practice listening, so listen to a range of accents. So that could mean, it's as easy as Googling, Australian news or New Zealand news or podcast or whatever. And just, you don't need to become like expertly tuned in to that accent. Just familiarize yourself with it so that it's not a shock on test day. Next, vocabulary. Many of you talk about being lost in the test, but what you're really saying is, I don't understand that word. So if you don't understand a word, you're going to be like, oh, what does that mean? And then you'll lose concentration, or you might not be able to find the correct answer. So improving your vocabulary is absolutely essential. Improving your vocabulary is going to improve your reading scores, your speaking scores, and your writing scores. So always be improving your vocabulary. And finally, strategies. If you have a step-by-step strategy for all of the different types of question, you're going to be familiar with all of the different types of questions, and you're going to know exactly what to do. And most importantly, if you use these to practice and you implement these, then you're taking some of the thinking out of it. So you're going to be doing lots of multitasking. You don't want to be thinking, where do I do? What do I do here? But if you have a strategy, then that's one less thing to think about. You're doing exactly what a proven strategy will help you with. And we'll look at that in lesson 3. So preparing to listen. So we've talked about what you need to be doing in the months and the weeks running up to the test. And if you do those things, it's really, really going to help you. But when you are preparing to listen, so you're in the test has begun, and before the listening starts, you will have time to look at the question and think about the question. And this is absolutely essential. The students who use this time wisely will always get higher scores than the students who don't use this time wisely. It's just a fact. Lots of students are like, just, look out the window or look around at the other students. But the students who have their head down and are actively doing things during this time, and the key there is actively, you need to be doing certain things, will have a higher score than the ones just looking out the window at the birds. So there are a few things that you need to be thinking about. One is familiarize yourself with the question, because if you're familiar with it, you're going to have an easier time. Number 2, keywords. Depending on the question, you might be highlighting or underlining or circling different types of keywords. That doesn't mean just circling everything you see, but strategically thinking about what how you are going to find the correct answer. Number 3, synonyms, because as you know, just because it says computers doesn't mean that you'll hear computers. It might be laptops or desktops or iPads or something like that. And number 4, try and predict what the correct answers are. That's really going to help you during the listening test. So let's have a look at this. This is a diagram or a map of a library. And what's going to happen is the recording is going to take you through this map, and you're going to have to label different things. All right. So the very first thing you need to do is familiarize yourself with the question. Okay, this is a maps question. All right, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 answers that I need to answer, and then familiarize yourself with the actual map. So I'm going to be starting here, and they might say, to my left, that's going to be this room. To my right, or next to the librarian's desk, straight on, to my left is fiction, to my right is non-fiction. Here, next to the seminar room, beyond non-fiction or beside non-fiction is this room. This is probably going to be the name of a room. This also is probably going to be the name of a room. Fiction, non-fiction, so this is the main part of the library. This is probably going to be another area of the library, so it could be a different type of book. So you are really, really understanding what's going on. And the people that do that are going to score much higher than the people that don't. Then let's think about keywords here. So librarian's desk, so they might talk a little bit about that, so that's very, very important. Non-fiction and fiction. So beside non-fiction is the seminar room, beside non-fiction is this room, the library area. So thinking about the exact things that they're going to talk about. And then we have this list of words. So synonyms, art collection, so that could be paintings or drawings, children's books, that could be books for kids or books for young people, computers, desktops, laptops, iPads, whatever, local history collection, history of the local area or history of our town or our town in the past, because you need to be thinking about all of these, because the correct answer might be a synonym. So if you familiarize yourself with these before the recording starts, you're at a huge advantage. And number 4, predict what's going to happen. So looking at this, fiction, non-fiction, this one is probably another type of book. So probably is children's books or reference books. This could be a room, so art collection, computers, meeting room, tourist information. So you're listening out for these things and you're predicting what is going to happen, and that is really going to help you stay focused on what you need to do, and you're not going to get lost. Because it's much easier, like say you're predicting that this is children's books and they say walk straight on, here you'll find fiction and non-fiction, and you'll also find kids books. You know exactly what's happening, which is much easier to do versus not doing it. I'm sure you'll agree. Now, you're not going to have a lot of time, but you will have enough time, and it's about using that time wisely. And when you're practicing, take it very slow at the beginning. You don't need to do everything at exam speed in the beginning. When you're first learning how to do this, take it slow and think about what you're doing, and that will really help you master this skill of preparing before you listen. During listening, so this is more tactical, about thinking about the actual problem. So let's say you have 5 questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what happens is you might get stuck on this question. So this question, no problem, you get it straight away. This question, let's say it's a multiple choice and you're unsure if it's A, B, or C. Let's say they have 3 very similar meanings. The meanings all kind of sound the same to you. You didn't really catch what that person said, or it was a strange accent, or something was not right, where you couldn't really understand what's happening. So if you focus too much on this one, then this question is going to come, then this one, then this one. The recording is not going to stop. The recording will not stop because you can't find the answer. And remember, you'll only be able to hear it once. So if you focus too much on this one, you're probably going to get that one wrong, you're probably going to get that one wrong, you're probably going to get that one wrong. And these 3 might be quite easy for you, but because you focus too much on this one, you've kind of destroyed your chances with these. And these could be very easy marks. So you need to be a little bit tactical when it comes to a question that you find difficult. A question that you would normally get lost in and you would lose track, you could just mark the answer that you think is most likely. Or you could put like an X beside it, marking the fact that you need to come back to that later and you weren't 100% sure about it. Or you could just guess the answer and move on. That is much better to do one of those tactical things. So mark the one that you think is probably the correct answer, and then you can confirm it later. Just guess the answer. You're not going to guess every answer. We're talking about, being tactical with ones that you're lost and you find really difficult. Or you could just mark it that you need to come back and think about it later, or make some notes quickly and then move on. And then that will mean that you have, maybe a 50-50 chance of only getting this one correct, but you increase your chances of getting these 3. Whereas if you focus too much on this one, you have a 30% chance maybe of getting it right 1 out of 3, but then a 0% chance for all of these, because you've no idea what's going on. So it's about being a little bit tactical and strategic. And at the end of the day, most of you do not need to get every single question correct. So when I give this advice to students, they don't like it because they say, no, I want to get this one correct. It's like, you don't need to get 100%. Do you need a band 9? No. So why are you trying to get a band 9? Obviously, you want to get as many of them done as possible, and as many of them correct as possible, but let's think about how the actual listening test is set up. There are 4 parts, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, 10 questions in each part, and they start off being quite easy, and then they get more difficult and more difficult and more difficult and more difficult, until we get to here where you get the most difficult questions. Well, why is that? Well, here we have band 0. So if you get none of them correct, you get a 0. But if you get all of them correct, you get a band 9. So these last questions are to separate out the band 9s from the 8.5s. These questions are to separate out the 8.5s from the 8s. These questions are to separate out the 8s from the 7.5s. So many of you are worrying about the last questions when you're never probably going to get them correct. So my advice, if you need a band 8, would be focus on getting as many of these as possible. Try and get 100% in all of these areas, which you're more than capable of doing if you're aiming for a band 8. And then these ones, try and get as many of them as you can. But if you're not at a band 9 level, which most of you never will be, and there's nothing wrong with that, most students will be very, very happy with an 8. Get as many of these as you can, but don't worry if you always get the last couple wrong, because that's the way they're set up. What we're going to look at first are common problems when it comes to multiple choice questions. So with my students, what I like to do when it comes to reading questions and listening questions is identify the common reasons why people make mistakes, so that they're aware of those and they can avoid those on test day. So there's some very, very common mistakes that people make and common problems that people have when it comes to multiple choice questions. So the first one is that when you are looking at, let's say you get a question like this, and one could be home, one could be office, one could be at a depot. They might talk about all 3 of these. All right. So let's say, for example, the question is you're listening to someone making an order. So they want like a TV or delivered to somewhere. And they first might say, oh, could you deliver it to my house or my home? And then they'll say, actually, I'm at work that day, so I'll be in the office. And could you actually just leave it in the depot? So they've mentioned all 3 of these, and you might hear all 3 of those, and that might cause a lot of confusion, because what a lot of people do is they will listen for the first one, and the first one they hear, they'll just tick that one, because they know the recording is not going to stop. They're under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, and then they might hear office or depot later, or a synonym of one of those, and they're like, oh, they panic and they lose track. So listen to the whole recording and be aware that they might talk about one, but that is not necessarily the correct answer. Problem number 2 is related to synonyms. So many of you will underline key words. So let's say, for example, this is the question, and you'll be underlining home and underlining office, underlining depot. And because you've underlined those or highlighted those, you're really, really focused on those words and you're listening for those words. But in the recording, it won't actually state those words. It'll state a synonym or a paraphrase of that word. So it might say, could you deliver it to where I live or my house instead of home? I'll be at work. Could you deliver it there instead of office? Or they might talk about, could you deliver it to the company warehouse instead of the depot? So they're not really mentioning these words. They can mention these words. You should always listen out for them, but you should always be aware of synonyms and paraphrases as well. And that's the reason why improving your vocabulary will really, really help you improve your overall listening score. Common problems 3 and 4. So the first common problem when it comes to here, imagine you're listening and it's talking about a business and what the type of business is. So it could be a manufacturing business, an industrial business, or an agricultural business. The first problem is you might not understand what one of these words mean. And many people would panic and be like, oh, I don't know what agricultural means. And then you're going to panic and not really know what to do, and you're going to get really, really stressed out. The other problem is, let's say it's definitely not this one, but it's maybe manufacturing or industrial. And these they're not the same, but they look maybe quite similar to you. So with most multiple choice questions, not only in the realm of IELTS, but most, proper multiple choice question, there will normally be 2 or 3 that are very, very similar. So you have to understand the meaning. So that's where vocabulary comes in again. The wider your range of vocabulary, the better your scores are going to be, because you'll be able to differentiate between the two. And then when you're listening, it might talk about something that's very similar to manufacturing and very similar to industrial, and you have to make up your mind and choose the correct answer based on what you hear. So those are 4 common problems. And what we also do with our students is the strategies that we give them help them overcome these common problems. So we build in mechanisms and steps that help them avoid these common problems. Because if you avoid the common problems, then you're well on your way to improving your score. So now I'm going to give you this step-by-step strategy. The first thing I'll say is there's no such thing as a super strategy or a magic strategy. Like you'll see on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, like power strategy or band 9 strategy. There's no strategy in the world that can take someone from like a band 6 to a band 9 overnight. It's not going to magically improve your listening skills. It's not going to magically improve your vocabulary, your general English, but it just helps you get into the habit of doing the right things and getting the best possible score for you. So they're very, very, very useful. And also what they do is, we've mentioned habit. If you were practicing these strategies, what it does is when you practice over and over again using those strategies, when you go into the test, you know exactly what to do. So I don't like using the word like robotic. You're not like a robot, but nearly, you see what I mean. You see the question and you follow a step-by-step system, and that kind of frees up your brain to focus on thinking about the correct answer and thinking about the vocabulary and the synonyms and all of those things. So they're very, very useful. But don't think that they are magic. They are not magic. They are not super. You can't just follow, a step-by-step strategy and immediately improve your score. So let's look at number 1. Number 1 sounds very boring, but this is absolutely crucial. Read the instructions carefully. If you do not read the instructions carefully, you're going to lose marks. Many, many, many students come to me and they say, I've done 20 vocabulary or listening tests or 200 reading tests, and I keep getting the same score. And we look at their mistakes, and often it's nothing to do with the fact that the level isn't high enough. They're just not reading the instructions carefully. If you don't follow the instructions, you're not going to get the score that you need. Number 2, read and understand the question. So the instructions and the questions are 2 separate things. The instructions will be at the top, and it's very, very important. For example, even in the reading test, where it'll say, do not write more than 2 words. If you write more than 2 words and or a number, all of these different instructions, if you don't do those things correctly, then you're going to lose the mark. But the question is separate. So understand the instructions and then understand the questions. Many of you don't use that time period effectively between you seeing the questions and the recording start. You're going to have a little bit of time. Use that time effectively. If you don't understand the questions, it's going to be really difficult. It doesn't matter how good your English is or how good your listening skills are. If you don't follow those 2 simple steps, you're going to be in trouble. And many of you might think, well, that's obvious. Like, I'm going to do that anyway. Most of your behavior is habit. You do the same things over and over again. Whatever your habit is, you will mostly do that. So using these strategies is guaranteeing that you will check the instructions, then look at the question and understand it, because you're going to, by practicing over and over again, get into that habit. Step number 3, underline any keywords. What are the keywords? So it will differ from question to question, but the words that you think are important in order for you to get the correct answer. So you can underline them, circle them, whatever you do, or you don't have to do that. You can just look at them and understand these are the words that I need to be listening out for. These are the important words that are going to determine whether I get the correct answer or not. Number 4, think of synonyms. We've already talked about this. You might hear the keyword. So keywords are important, but you might not hear the keywords. You might hear a synonym, or even you might hear a paraphrase, of the keyword. And then do not mark the first thing you hear. As we already discussed, it might talk about one, it might talk about another, and then it might take that answer away and give you another answer. Listen to it all and then decide the correct answer. Not the whole tape script, but that whole part of the recording that deals with that question. Don't mark the first answer. Think about it first and then mark the correct answer. And pick the correct answer, or the answer that you think based on, take an educated guess if you're not sure. But with multiple choice questions, always pick an answer. If you're unsure, you can maybe put an X beside it, and maybe, for example, if you're 100% sure, put a circle around it, and then you can go back and make a decision. But with multiple choice, even if if a monkey did it and just picked randomly, they would get more than if you don't do it at all. So please just do check and put the best answer that you can. And most importantly, move on. Do not dwell on the answer. If you can't think of a correct answer for the multiple choice one, just make your best guess and move on. And we talked about that in lesson 2. So again, this strategy is not going to guarantee a band 9 or anything like that. But what it does is it gives you the correct habit, the correct system. And the key is that you actually apply this strategy. A huge number of students email me and say, I used your strategy and I got a band 6. It's like, what do you mean use? Oh, well, we read it and then we went into the test and we used the strategy. It's like, no. That's not how you use a strategy. You practice, you implement it over and over and over again until it becomes habit, until it becomes second nature. And you don't even have to think about it. As soon as you see the question, it's like, bum, 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 bum. Follow a system, listen for the answer, mark the correct answer.